All right. So at AWS Networking Basics course, and today we have the introduction. So what exactly are we going to cover in this course, and how is it going to help you in your AWS journey? So when I was starting my AWS journey, one of the things that I noticed is I was thinking about certifications, and I was thinking, okay, let me start preparing for certifications. But most of the AWS certifications, they are multiple choice questions based certifications, MCQs based certifications. So if you are preparing for those, yes, it increases your knowledge significantly of different technologies and different AWS services. But the issue is that it is more theoretical. You need to know a lots and lots of services and what exactly do they do. You also know the billing information properly if you are going for certification. All these things are extremely useful. That's why we include them into a 52 weeks program. But we realize that it's better if somebody is just starting with AWS. If they have the knowledge of the four core technologies or the basic introduction to them, compute, storage, networking, and storage, and then if they can get some hands-on, at least on the compute part, because that's where everyone starts, right? When they learn cloud networking or cloud services, they first learn to start creating their virtual machines into the cloud. And virtual machines in AWS, those are the compute part, right? You are creating the computing solution. So we thought that is also something people need to know. And of course, whenever you are creating resources, you don't create just one resource. You want to create more than one resources. You want to create them into more than one places. So networking knowledge, especially the AWS based networking knowledge, also becomes crucial. So that's why we created this 8 weeks program, which is completely hands-on. So we will do a lot of practical work into AWS, but also we will learn along the way those basics. And then when you go for the theoretical topics in the 52-week program initially, uh, it becomes easier. Okay, yeah, this is something I had done, or this makes sense now because I have already created my free tier account, and now I can also practice other things which I want there. Although that 52-week program is not just theoretical, also it has lots and lots of practicals, but it comes slightly later because initially, like cloud practitioner certification doesn't have any practical approach to that. But solution architect, associate, and professional, there you will see more practicals. But to get started, it's a good idea to have a free tier account and start getting our hands dirty with some of the practicals as well, right? So first of all, let's talk about the course structure, and then later we will see that what exactly is covered practical wise as well. So the course structure is this particular live course that we have. This is an 8 weeks course, and it's going to be one live session per week, and it's going to be a 2 hour per session duration. So I always say in my courses to all the students, whether it is Cisco based, Linux, Juniper, or AWS, or Linux, that these courses are actually topic driven courses more than time driven. So sometimes we finish the courses before 2 hours, that particular session before 2 hours. Sometimes it takes slightly more than 2 hours also. And depending on, like, if you are going for CCIE or CCNP, and we are talking about MPLS or some detailed topic, then it might even go 2 hours and 30 minutes as well. So it's not time driven, it's topic driven. But a rough idea is it's around 2 hours per session, more or less. And in this course, we are going to start with the basics of networking. And basics of networking means what is exactly networking, what is IP addressing, what is subnetting. Although this is something that many people might already know if they are coming for AWS, but sometimes what happens, people come from different backgrounds and they are interested into learning cloud. And one thing you will notice in any kind of computing industry is that networking knowledge is a great asset. You need to know how things interact with each other, how communication is enabled, which is going to help immensely into all kind of certifications. If you want to go for cyber security or cloud services or more streamlined services, like if you're going for system administration, where you're learning Linux server or Windows server, they also need to get connected to other services. So networking knowledge is important. That's why in this live course, the first session you will see, first or second session that we will do, those will be about basics of networking. So not AWS networking, but networking in general, like exactly how networking is done, what are the important parts of it, like networking models and IP addressing, most importantly, subnetting. Subnetting is very important to understand because in AWS, you will see when we start the networking part of it, which is called the Virtual Private Cloud or VPC. VPC starts with the very first question that how many IP addresses we will need into each availability zone, each region, and also what CIDR block are we going to use for that? What particular supernet we can call it, or a big network chunk that we are going to use, and then we start dividing it into multiple subnets based on separating the services from one or separating them into different compartments basically. So subnetting knowledge can help you immensely later when we come to the AWS VPCs as well. So that's why we start with basics of networking, but of course, after that, we get to AWS. Most part of this course will be about AWS centric. Initial 1 or 2 sessions will be only for networking or the basics of networking. So when it comes to AWS, we are going to understand the logic of cloud. What exactly is cloud? What are the major players into AWS into cloud industry like Amazon, Microsoft, Azure, or Google Cloud as well. But then we'll go in depth into the AWS networking concepts. So once we understand basics of these things, we get into more details and more practicals we'll do about the VPCs. So VPC is basically your isolated network where you have all your resources. And then if you have multiple AWS accounts, you can also connect different VPCs and enable communication between them also. So we are going to understand that part as well. So for all these things, we are going to do a lot of practical as well. So we will actually create an AWS free tier account for this. So you can also create it. I will go through the procedure that exactly how we can create it. Very, very interesting and very, very important, because what happens is that when you have a free tier account, most of the services which you need to learn, you can actually use them for free for a certain period of time. And we will talk about this when it comes to that part as well.
Okay, a quick question.
Sure.
Okay, firstly, I bought a Linux Bible per se. That's what the author termed it. Is there any book you would recommend as a course companion of sorts for this class?
For this one, for this 8 weeks live class, I would say this is actually more than sufficient. You will not need any extra information apart from this. Rather, what I would say is that AWS documentation, which is online, that is very, very good for about every topic. So let's say if we are discussing today, just to give you an example, if we are discussing about how to access EC2 instance, which is a virtual machine, if it has a private IP address. So there is an EC2 instance connect endpoint service. So if I'm talking about that, I'm showing you the practical. If you think I need a little bit more information about this, you can actually go to the AWS documentation, or even simple search for that EC2 instance connect endpoint will first few results will take you to the AWS documentation, which is very in-depth and very, very useful. Also, second thing you will see is that we'll take some examples of AWS CLI also, although CLI is not necessary for the initial certifications. Later it becomes more useful, but we are going to take some examples of those. So if you become interested into that, the CLI documentation can also be extremely useful.
I'm definitely interested. I'm taking a cybersecurity class as well, or course rather.
Okay.
We had to do something called S3 buckets.
Right.
Bucket dumping. So is there any kind of, does this tie into cybersecurity at all as it relates to AWS?
So S3 is actually about the AWS. So S3 is actually called Simple Storage Service. It's one of the storage solution from AWS. So what happens in S3 is that it uses the object-based storage. Means you can place any kind of object there. It doesn't care what exactly you are placing here. It could be a image file. It could be a software. It's just dumping your database there, whatever, like a backup solution. And for that, you create different buckets. You can keep the different set of data separate by creating buckets. And we are going to touch a little bit of S3 in this, although it's the storage solution, not the networking solution. So we are going to go more in depth in our 52 weeks program about S3. But yes, it's the AWS based service basically.
So there'll be a cybersecurity course that you're going to add to this later on.
Yes, actually, that's our long-term plan because cybersecurity has many different aspects. You need to know the
Yeah.
networking knowledge, Linux knowledge, security knowledge, of course, the cloud knowledge as well.
Uh,
So the next part we are going to actually cover, or next year, our aim would be on the security. So we are going to include security plus a little bit of ethical hacking as well, and then CCI security certification, which is the ultimate destination for that. We are going to start those
yeah.
things.
You're making me jealous. I want to learn the cybersec as it relates to AWS and Linux. I think that would be helpful. For those
Yes.
who are former students, would there be some kind of discount if we were to sign up for that program?
Yes, absolutely. So the one thing is that we are always very happy when people come back if they are
Yeah,
satisfied with our services. So definitely, I think Christian can help you in that part. So if you talk to him, he'll be more than happy to discuss with you all the plans.
fantastic. Thank you.
No problem. Also, we are going to do a lot of hands-on practicals on real AWS resources. So let's say if I'm discussing VPC peering, or if I'm talking about net gateways, so we are also going to see the practical example, how exactly the net gateway work, or how is it different from the internet gateway. So internet versus net gateway, why there are two different types of gateways, what are the pros and cons of both, and then we immediately see this in a practical, so it makes more sense. And then you also repeat the same practical during the week, so it becomes very solidified. The understanding becomes easier, right? You overall, there will be a comfort level before you start your certification journey, basically. And of course, there will be a Q&A session at the end of every live Zoom session. So if you have any questions from the last week or this week, or maybe you have some certain question about can I do it in a different way, or I was trying this and I had this issue, we can discuss these things in this Q&A. Although if you have a detailed question where you had some issues and you need to exchange, show some like screenshots of the issue, then the Facebook group that we have, that will be a better place to ask, because in Facebook group there are other people also who have been doing this for some time. They can also chip in, or maybe there are other people who will benefit from your question, because if I answer there or somebody answering, they will also get the answer. So more detailed questions can be answered into our Facebook group, but any quick questions or anything that doubt clearing, basically we will do it into every week Q&A session as well. Also, one of the big asset of this course is there will be lifetime access to the session recordings on our portal. And one of the benefit of this is that if we are going to include anything extra in this course, maybe next year, or if we are going to add something because AWS has added some new services, then those will be added into the new classes. Those recordings will be added to the portal, and that will be available to everyone, whoever has joined the class, even if he has joined 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So it's a lifetime access to session recordings and to the updated session recordings. So that is one of the very good benefit you will get. So that's what I was talking about, the lifetime access to any updates to the course, right? Also, once we are done with the individual topics, like in these 8 weeks, we'll go through different important topics of networking, like VPC services and all. But at the end of the day, we want to do a complete project. Like we want to spin up a new virtual machine, maybe a couple of them, and then we want to set up a web server on that virtual machine, and then we want to configure VPC in correct way so that our web server is properly accessible from the internet, from anywhere on the internet. So at the end, we will also going to do a web server project, where of course Linux knowledge is also needed, but not too much for this one. So if you are coming, like in your case, you already are doing Linux course, but if you are coming from a completely non-Linux background, anyone else, we will cover enough information so that we can create a proper web server and access it from anywhere on the internet. The emphasis here is the accessing part. So we enabling access to some services in AWS, so that anywhere from on the internet you can access it from. That will be the main objective of this project, right? So it will tie up everything that we have learned, or most of the important things that we had learned so far. Sometimes what happens that you have some services in your account. So you are, let's say, a service provider, but you are not AWS, you are not Amazon, you are a service provider on your own, and you have your own clients who want to access services or some servers in your AWS account, and they also have client devices in the AWS itself. So you can see these are two different AWS accounts, one for one organization, one for another organization. So is it possible that we don't want to have our web server to be accessible from internet, but we want only some certain clients to access our web services within the AWS? So VPC peering actually helps you to connect different VPCs, even if they belong to different accounts. That way you can share services with your customers who also have resources on AWS. So that is something also we are going to see in this course, right? So that brings us to the course curriculum. Um, I see a question from you. Please link the Facebook group. Yeah, sure. I'll do that. Uh, by the end of this course, that time I will just paste the link there, right? And also, I think I'll send you on the email as well so that you will have a record of that. All right. So let's talk about the course curriculum. So we have divided this course into two phases. Phase one is the basics of networking, which is independent of AWS. It is actually going to be useful for every thing else. Even if you're going for Linux or if you're going for any Microsoft certifications later, cybersecurity, or if you decide to go with Cisco, Juniper, all these courses actually need basics of networking knowledge. So this is actually very useful. It's not just AWS centric. So in phase one, we are going to start with the basics of networking, where we will cover some very, very important topics like what is networking, like OSI model, TCP/IP model, and basics of enabling communication. Why exactly do we need this? Then logical addressing like IP addressing and physical addressing like MAC addresses. What differences are between logical and physical addressing? Why are there two types of addressing? Why there is not just one address? Subnetting, the most important part of this phase one will be subnetting, because subnetting is used heavily in VPC creation, AWS networking solution, and one of the biggest design decision that you will take will be about subnetting. How many subnets am I going to use? What CIDR block am I going to use? So this knowledge of subnetting can be extremely useful there. And also, we are going to talk about some basics of switching and routing. Of course, not in very much detail, not like CCNA or anything, but we should know exactly what switching means, how is it different from routing, and what routing means, and how the routing tables are used to decide or to route the traffic from one location to another location, especially if that location is out of your network. This can be very useful in your AWS networking also, because when it comes to VPCs, route tables play also a big role in VPCs to steer the traffic to the internet, from the internet, from one VPC to another VPC, from one subnet to another subnet, connecting different resources. So routing knowledge, a basic of routing knowledge can be useful there. And we will have one lab also here. This will be a theoretical lab, subnetting lab, just to practice some subnetting questions so that we can understand that if you have certain requirement, like there are 4 departments, they need to use the same network, but has to be divided into 4 partitions. How can we do that? What will be the subnet mask for that? What will be the range of IP addresses for each department? These kind of simple questions we should be able to answer. So the subnetting lab will take care of that part, right? Then comes the main part, the phase two. You will see that phase one will be roughly 1 or 2 weeks only. The most of the remaining course will be about AWS. So we are going to start with introduction to the cloud services, where we will talk about what is cloud. So generally people get confused initially if they're starting their journey in networking, is that what exactly cloud means. So cloud is nothing but it's a data center basically, but it's not your data center. It is placed somewhere else. It is somewhere else, and it is proper connections. It has proper disaster recovery plans. It has proper backup plans so that your data can be properly saved there, right? So when I'm saving something or when I'm providing a service from my own server, it's called my own data center, right? But if I'm using or renting services of some other data centers somewhere on the internet, so people also call it's a server on the internet, but it's not just limited to the server. Server is just part of the computing, but it also provides storage, networking, and database services. So if you are taking these services placed somewhere else on a data center accessible from the internet, that is called cloud. So we are going to understand the basics of that. Who are the major players like Amazon, Microsoft, Google? What are their solutions? But then, of course, our concentration will be on Amazon Web Services, which is the uh, oldest solution as well. Started back in 2006. So we'll talk about AWS, and then we'll see how many different data centers they have. So you will see there are some certain keywords used in AWS like regions and availability zones. So what exactly do we mean by this, and which one of these keywords actually relate to the data center? Like, is it a single data, is a region a data center, or is availability zone a data center, or is it more than one data centers we are talking about, and more than one regions we are talking about? So if you want to have a service which has low latency, you may have to know, you should have the knowledge of regions, because let's say if I am working based in Singapore, and my clients mostly are in Asia Pacific region, APAC region, then it's better to host my services into the Asia Pacific regions like Singapore or Mumbai or Hong Kong. But if I have like a global application which should be available to multiple customers spread across the globe, then I may want to use multiple regions for my application and replicate it and use some certain features like auto scaling to make sure that I can meet the ongoing demand of the customer requests. So we'll discuss about the design part of it basically, and then we will touch upon briefly that how many different cloud services are there. Now, in AWS, you will see as of now when we are talking, there are more than 200 services that AWS provides for different things. There are so many different services, and they keep on adding more and more new services. But the core service, if we talk about, if you're thinking about using cloud, would be to maybe create some virtual servers for your web server or your e-commerce server, database server. So the compute and storage to store your data. Storage also, there are two types of storage: block storage and object storage. So object storage simply means you store different types of objects. Like S3 we were discussing earlier, simple storage service. That's the uh, that's the object storage service where you can have different types of data stored. Some of them could be image files, some of them could be softwares, some of them could be documents. It doesn't care. It says that you can create a bucket, which is basically as part of the storage, just like in a hard disk drive, we create partitions, right? We have buckets here, and you can start storing database whatever you like. And it has a lot of different solutions also. For example, if you are going to access this data frequently, then there'll be a different charge, or it will be slightly more expensive. But if you think that I want like a 1 2 3 backup solution, right, or 3 to 1 backup solution, you should have three location of backup. Two of them should be off site, and one of them should be accessible at any point of time. So you can consider this as the offsite location database storage. So if you have few TB terabyte of database, you want to dump somewhere and forget about it. In case of disaster only, you want to access it, then you can also use some of the S3 solutions, which are extremely cheap. Some of them are so cheap that it costs around like $1 for 1 terabyte of data storage per month. So it becomes easy. But the thing is that those cannot be accessed immediately, and when you are accessing them back, that time it costs more uh, versus just storing them there. So they are generally used, by the way, that's called the Glacier S3 service, and those are generally used for very long time data storage. You want to forget about it for 10 years. Only in case of issues with other backups you need to go there, you can use those things. Same thing with networking. Networking is basically VPC, Virtual Private Cloud. It's a isolated resource in AWS where you can create your own network header block. You can your own subnets. You can create your own routing tables to enable communication between those subnets. You can create different types of gateways like internet gateway, net gateway to enable communication to and from the internet. And you can also create peering between different subnets, different availability zones, even different VPCs into different regions as well. And database services are database is something that can be SQL based, or it could be no SQL based as well. So both type of database services, we'll just briefly touch upon how exactly do they work. But of course, practical part, we are only going to cover the compute and networking. Compute because we need some resources to check our networking, and maybe a little bit of storage, because there is another type of storage called EBS, elastic block storage, which we will have to use when we are creating any kind of virtual machine, which is called EC2 in the compute section. So compute storage and networking we will use more, Database is a completely different service, and you need to have the SQL knowledge for that. Even if you're creating a NoSQL database, you need to have a use case for that. And generally, those are used as a backend. So if you're creating a web server or website where there will be a lot of input from user, you can actually send them to a database service in the backend. So we'll
Okay,
just touch upon briefly on that part.
ARPit.
Yeah,
Pardon the interruption. As with any
sure.
technology, there are always new features coming in and out. So I did a
Right.
little bit of research. I see there's like a GraphQL API app sync and these new features that are coming out in 2024. How do you
Right.
accommodate that? How does that coincide with the class structure, the ongoing class structure?
For the so there are two things, right? First thing is this live code, which is
Yeah.
more concentrating on the core technologies. So we anyway don't cover all the technologies here, all the services here. So in this one, it's more about like core services, right? Compute, storage, networking. So in this course, anyway, we will not cover all the services. But even in the 52-week course that we have, we keep on updating it whenever we see that if there is something new that needs to be discussed. So
Okay.
we keep on updating those. So of course, those updates you will get immediately whenever we create the pre-recorded sessions for those. Because those are pre-recorded, we can always update them at any point of time. Also, one more thing, in AWS, you will see, as I mentioned earlier, there are more than 200 services. So only few of them they are going to ask in the exam, and even fewer you are going to use in your real life job. If you go and do a job, or if you get a responsibility based on AWS, I personally know some of my friends who have been working in AWS for more than 10 years. They also cannot name all the all the 200 services, right?
Of course,
Because they
yeah.
say it's something that not everybody doesn't use. But yeah, for certification, it's a good idea to know if something important coming up new. Uh, for example, if we are talking about machine learning, there are so many different things in machine learning. They keep on adding every year, and you need to be familiar of the excuse me. You need to be familiar of the names and exactly what they do. But that's about it. You don't need to have the in-depth knowledge of all the technologies, all the services that are coming up new. But yeah, you should be aware of, okay, I know this service and it does this, but that's it. For example, there is a service called Snowmobile. Snowmobile allow you to have the storage delivered to you in a container. It could be a truck also from AWS. Now, how many people are going to use that? Not many. So you should be aware what exactly it does, but it's not necessary that you need to have a practical knowledge of that. But the core services, yes, everyone expect you to not only know it, but also have the proper practical knowledge of this as well, right? So that's the important part here, right? But to answer your question, yes, if there are new services added that are important for our certifications in our pre-recorded course for 52 weeks, we are going to keep on updating that as well. All right. So the next thing is we are going to talk about some of the other services basics as well, but no, of course not all 200 of them. But some are, if they are important services which are not part of the core service, but actually basically helping them. For example, there is a SNS service, simple notification service, which can send you an email if something happens. And we are going to do a very important practical about billing, because when you create a free tier account, although it is free tier, but not all services are free, and not all services are free all the time. They are only free up to a limit, right? So if you are just playing around with AWS, you are just learning it, and you are using a free tier account, you don't want to accidentally keep things running which are costing you, which are billing you, and at the end of the month you get like $500 bill. We don't want to do that. So we are going to learn. We are also going to do a practical where we create a billing alarm. So whenever our services start costing us more than a certain amount, like if it is going beyond $5 or $10, we
Hmm.
should get an email, and we should be aware. Okay, there is something I left running, which is actually costing us. So we can go and shut down those resources in AWS.
Isn't there
Yeah,
some kind of
Jonathan.
AI? Isn't there some kind of AI system that does that for you automatically?
Actually, yeah, the billing alarms that we are going to create, that is automatically going to take care of that. But the AI that you are discussing about, that can help you to even shut down those resources automatically. So, for
Exactly.
example, right, so the billing alarm we are discussing, this will give you an idea. Okay, I left some things running. Then you can go and manually check the regions and then shut them down. But you can create some automation where you can shut them down right from the AWS CLI. That is one of the power of AWS CLI. You can create some scripts to
Oh,
have those AWS commands, and then it will shut down resources as well.
okay. And that's with Python or with another language.
It could be any language which can actually initiate an API call using the key. So Python is perfectly possible.
Okay.
Also, you can use simple batch scripts as well. Like in Windows, you can create batch files, right? In those batch
Fantastic.
files, you can have the AWS CLI commands,
Yeah.
set of commands, and then it is going to delete all the S3 buckets, all the EC2 instances, VPCs, and you can have a clean slate immediately. So
Awesome.
any script language will be fine.
You'll teach me batch, correct?
Yes, batch scripting I can show you in this course itself.
Okay.
But to be honest, the Python and all these things that is not part of this. So the batch file that we create in Windows computers, that definitely we can cover. All right. So the next thing is we are going to go into the in-depth about VPCs, right? So VPC, the isolated resource in AWS, which allows you to create multiple subnets and then start hosting resources. How exactly does that work? Within the availability zone or region, or even across the availability zones and regions, how actually we can create VPCs. So you will see that there are some default VPCs also already there. You can directly start using them, but you can create your custom VPCs as well. And we are going to see that example also, right? So in phase two, we will do a lot of practicals as well. So if you see some of the labs that we will do is like setting up a free tier AWS account. Uh, Very important thing, although not part of networking. And it's a big topic actually, authentication. But we will cover enough so that we can get started, like creating users and groups who can access your AWS account and making it safe. So setting multi-factor authentication for the root user and also for other user accounts, very important. Then we start creating some resources. So the compute resource, the virtual machine that you can create in AWS, it is called EC2 or Elastic Compute Cloud. So it's just a fancy name for a virtual machine. Means you can create an operating system like just like you do in a VMware. You can install an operating system. You are doing this in the cloud. So that's called EC2. So we are going to create an EC2 instance. And whenever you create a virtual machine, you need to have an associated storage, right? So you will see that in the EC2 VMs, you cannot use S3, simple storage service. It can actually access the S3 later to retrieve some data, but it cannot be the boot volume. It cannot be used as a booting storage medium. You have to use the elastic block storage, which we will need to associate with this. So we will see that as well, how we can create these things. And although EC2 VM is, setting up is very easy, but we are going to touch upon some of the very important aspect of it, like what exactly is AMI, Amazon Machine Images, how do you choose the correct machine image, what exactly do we mean by different machine types? They have T2 Nano, T2 dot micro. There are different naming conventions they use. So what does they affect, and how do we select the correct AMI? And then what important things to remember for your free tier account so that you don't end up paying extra if you are not going to use those resources, right? So we'll discuss those things. We'll also talk about setting up a VPC to enable communication between VMs. So you cannot do anything in AWS without VPC. That's why you will see that when you start creating VMs, like if you are a new user account, sorry, if you're a new user of AWS and you are just playing around with VMs, without noticing, you are actually using a VPC, which is the default VPC. So we will see how we can actually use the default and also the custom VPCs. We'll also talk about the subnets, route tables, which are used to enable communication between different VPCs, and also the firewall part of it. So, of course, if you have some services which are accessible from internet, you want to make sure that they are properly secured. So, security groups are actually the VM level firewalls or EC2 level firewall, and network ACLs are subnet level firewall. So, on both level, you can actually control the access to your different resources to and from to the resource or from the resource to somewhere, both side of or both direction of access we can actually control. We'll talk about the gateways as well. So whenever you want to go to internet or whenever somebody wants to access your resources from internet, we need gateways. So there are internet gateways and net gateways. What is the difference between those? and pros and cons. We are going to discuss that as well. We also talk about some very important topics like VPC peering, which allows two different VPCs to enable communication, even if they belong to different regions, even if they belong to different accounts also. Like let's say I have one region in North Virginia in US and another region is in Singapore. I have two different VPCs and some resources into both VPCs. I want to enable communication between these resources. By default, it doesn't happen because by default they belong to different VPCs. Communication cannot happen between them unless until we configure something called VPC peering. So we'll see the practical for that as well, the logic and the practical both. So anything I'm mentioning here, we are going to go through proper logic, understanding the theory properly, and then we will do the practical. Right? Yeah, Jonathan, you have a question?
Yeah, awesome. When you talk about working in, let's say Singapore, Malaysia, or Indonesia, is there any
Right.
language requirement at all, or in terms of
No,
using
no,
the
no.
system? No.
No, that it's all it's completely in English. I think there might be a option for you to change the language yourself if you want,
Okay.
but by default, the management console that we are going to use, it will be completely in English from anywhere. No worries there. Also, we are going to talk about VPC endpoints. You will see that some services like S3 simple storage service or some database services like DynamoDB, these services are not into your private VPC. They are actually accessible only through internet. So even if you are using some services from VPC, like your server is inside AWS, like EC2 VM, and you want to access the S3 bucket, you still go through the internet. You have to get out to the internet and then come back to S3 because you don't have a direct connectivity to S3. But if you want, you can have a private connectivity directly from your resources to the S3 or DynamoDB from the or within the AWS global network. So you don't need to leave the AWS network for this. But for that, you need to create something called endpoints, and we are going to learn those as well and how exactly we can set these things up. And also, at lastly, we are also going to understand how we can configure Apache web server on Linux and then setting access to the Apache web server from the internet. So finally, our web server should be accessible from anywhere on the internet, but it should be properly secured. So we will configure these security groups and network ACLs firewall so that the access is controlled and restricted. We can also restrict it to a certain subnet. Let's say you have your enterprise network in your company and your company is using a certain block of IP addresses to access internet. So you can allow only those IP addresses to access your web server. So nobody else on the internet will be able to access it. Only your organization computers can will be able to access this. So you can be more restrictive or less restrictive. Those practicals also we are going to use, right? So speaking of this course, what exactly does make it unique? So you will see that there is no knowledge, no prior requirement of any networking or cloud knowledge because we are going to start from scratch. So you might already have some knowledge of networking or cloud if you're coming to this course, but it's not needed. It will be actually more beneficial because if you have some knowledge, it will just bridge the gap. But if you don't have any information about cloud or networking at all, no worries, we got you covered. We'll start right from the scratch, starting from what is networking, right? So we take the grounds up approach here. We build upon the basics of networking, then basics of cloud, and on that we actually build the networking knowledge. So it's a very proper step-by-step approach, which takes you from no knowledge to very comfortable in 8 weeks, and then it's a great launching pad for your certification preparation with the 52 weeks pre-recorded program. So it's a practical way to learn AWS, theory plus hands-on. So when we talk about security firewalls, we also go and check the practical. If we talk about users and groups, we immediately go and create users and groups and see how do they interact with each other. So everything is actually backed with the hands-on practicals. We complete it with a project so that we use a few of these services together and see how do they work in tandem. Like when I say a web server project, we need to know how to set up an EC2 instance. We need to know how to create a VPC, how to add a public subnet, how to create an internet gateway, link it with your subnet, create proper route table entries, and how to set up entries into the firewall. And finally, access your web server from internet. So a lot of different services will be used to complete the project. That will be a great reinforcement of whatever we will learn throughout the course. Of course, at the end of the course, you will be familiar and more confident with basic cloud services. But to be honest, it is more than basic. Like especially for the networking part, you will have slightly advanced knowledge also, like endpoints and peering and all these things are slightly advanced. They are not on the very basic level. So it's a great addition to your knowledge base for cloud. And it's a good, this 8-week program that we have, the live program, it's a good starting point for AWS Cloud Practitioner or Solution Architect Associate exams. Because when you go for the pre-recorded sessions, 52 weeks, they are more certificate centric. But the practical knowledge of most of these things will give you an extra edge, and it makes you more comfortable to start practicing or starting for these certifications. Also, as I mentioned earlier, we have a Facebook group for asking questions. Soon I will copy the link from the Facebook group and send you on the email, as well as I will paste it here so that in case if you want to join that group, um, you can do that. Also, another thing which makes it unique, as we mentioned, is lifetime access to the recordings and any updates that might be there. That will also be included here. And any suggestions or support for the next steps after the course completion will also be provided. So let's say you are done with 8 weeks course and you want to exactly know that can I do I need any other ebooks or what exactly, which websites will be good to actually help you in learning cloud practitioner certification, or are there any like practice questions available? Those things I can guide you in a proper way once you are done with this course and you want to move to the next part or to start your next level journey for that. So let's talk about some frequently asked questions about this program and generally these live sessions. So do I need any previous networking knowledge? So absolutely not. We will start from the very scratch. And can I use my PC for all practice labs, or do I need any specific resources? So for AWS, everything actually is done either from the AWS Management Console, which is a web-based console. So all you need is a browser, or from the AWS CLI, which is actually a software you install and then you use your command line interface, like your Windows command line or Linux command line or Mac OS terminal, and you can use your AWS CLI commands from there. So to answer your question, no, you don't need any special resources. All you need is a PC with an internet connection. That's the only thing required. Is joining live sessions mandatory? So it's the mandatory in the sense that it's not mandatory. That means you will have the recordings also available later and for lifetime as well. But joining live session will be highly recommended because first of all, it's only 8 weeks course. And second thing is that when you join the live course, you actually gain the momentum and you see that you watch me doing those things and you can immediately ask questions. Instead, if you're watching the recording, you have to send the question to the Facebook group, and then although there also you get answer very quickly, but it takes a little bit more time instead of getting immediate answers. So joining live session is recommended, highly recommended, although it's not mandatory. Will there be a new practice lab every week? So that depends on the week, right? Initially, when we start with the basics of networking, so there we will not have any practical lab, but we will have a subnetting lab in the first or second week. But after that, when we start AWS, every week we will do something practical, like creating AWS accounts, setting up multi-factor authentication, creating user accounts, and VPC and everything that we discussed earlier. What if I get stuck in a lab and can't find the solution? So first of all, most of the AWS solutions that we have, they are actually very straightforward. Once you understand the logic, which we will make sure we understand properly, then practical is a very step-by-step procedure. So the recordings will help you immensely in this case. So if you get stuck, you can go back and watch the recording again and see exactly what the procedure was taken. But sometimes what happens while you are watching the recording, maybe you miss the live session, or maybe in the live session you did not think about that question. If you get any question while watching the recording and say, why is it done in this manner, you can take a screenshot of that part and you can ask the question on the Facebook group. So the more detailed or more elaborate question would be, it would become easier for us to answer you quickly and more accurately, right? So definitely you can have your doubts and ask as many questions as you want. There is absolutely no limit on that. How do I prepare for the exam? So in AWS, the exams start with Cloud Practitioner. You can actually skip Cloud Practitioner as well. You can directly go for Solution Architect Associate exam. But for preparing for certifications, you will have to go through the 52 weeks program, because that is more aligned with the different certifications syllabus and exactly what you need to prepare. But this course is going to help you immensely in getting started and becoming comfortable with the practical hands-on knowledge of AWS. So this 8-week program is not going to help you in pass any exam, but it will help you to get started with your certification preparation journey. So to be honest, I will tell you that most of the topics that you will see in the exam, you will find it yourself more comfortable with those after this 8-week hands-on program. But more streamlined answer will be, or solution will be into the 52-week program, 52 weeks pre-recorded program, which is there. Will I have opportunity to ask questions during the live session? So in live sessions, we always mute the students for the duration of the presentation. But while I am presenting, that time also you can ask your questions into the chat, and I will answer the question there. And also once the presentation is done, I also unmute a student so that there is a small Q&A session, and at the end, in case if you have more questions, you can ask that time as well. So absolutely, you will have the opportunity to ask the question in the live session. So what if I have a doubt during the week when there is no live session? Facebook group will be your friend. You can ask the questions there. In case if you have a very simple question and you think I don't need to go to the Facebook group, I want to ask immediately. You can also ask below the recorded video. So you're watching the recording and some question comes up in your mind, in your brain. You can immediately go to the comment section below the recording and you can paste your question there. That also comes directly to me and I will answer you there. So apart from these FAQs, we are done with the presentation. So let's get started and let's see if you have any other questions as well. I'll be more than happy to answer. Thanks, John. Let me know.
Thank you so much, Arpit. I think that covers everything for today. I look forward to formally getting started next week.
Definitely. And thanks a lot. Have a good night. Bye-bye.